AJ, how many times do I have to tell you I am not going to let you do a Star Wars Defined video about The Last Jedi?
Why not, Richard? If we're going to be on this playlist that features all the major players from the YouTube film analysis scene talking about their favourite Star Wars scene or character or moment, then I want to do our one about something that I care about.
Yeah, but this playlist could be our chance to finally crack 5,000 subscribers, and you want to just throw that away by covering the most divisive Star Wars film of all time?
Well, if people don't like my video, then they can just make their own.
They can do that.
Yes, they can do that. They can make their own videos celebrating their favourite thing about Star Wars, and then they can email it to Brown Table, who'll chuck it up on the playlist.
You mean the playlist in the description of this video?
Yes, the playlist that's in the description of this video! And this video is going to be about The Last Jedi, because it's my favourite Star Wars movie. Snoke's death in The Last Jedi is my favourite scene in all of Star Wars. It's surprising, it's shocking, and yet, I think, it makes perfect sense. Considered by many to be the most exciting twist in Star Wars canon since the Darth Vader I am your father reveal, Snoke's death is definitely not without its praise. However, this is certainly not the general consensus regarding the pivotal moment in the Skywalker saga's most divisive entry. A few years back, I made a video explaining the storytelling trope of Chekhov's gun, the rule which says you should only include stuff in your story which is relevant to the overall piece. It's pointless to set up characters or plot threads which don't pay off. If you introduce a gun in the first act, it has to go off before the end. One of the comments this video received read, "Ryan Johnson, watch this video, you f***ing dumbass. This is why you can't have Rey's parents be nobodies." This comment left me at somewhat of a quandary. I'm obviously a firm believer in Chekhov's gun, and I'm honoured that someone would think that my video was intelligent enough to use as a teaching tool for someone who directed one of the best television episodes of all time. The Fly episode. However, I do have to admit that I am a Last Jedi apologist. Not only do I really love the film, but my favourite aspects were all the ways in which Ryan Johnson subverted our expectations. With the likes of Rey's parents being nobody important.
They were nobody.
And of course the death of Supreme Leader Snoke. More like Supreme Leader joke. My name is AJ and welcome to my Star Wars Defined video, where I frantically try to marry my respect for Chekhov's gun with my love for the death of Snoke in The Last Jedi. A mysterious character and enigmatic plot thread set up in The Force Awakens which sparked 2 years of fan speculation, which itself sparked this shirt, and it literally has no payoff. Only maybe it does. Because really, the trope we should be talking about when it comes to Snoke is not Chekhov's gun, but rather Red's herring. Sorry, a red herring. A clue or piece of information which is or is intended to be misleading or distracting. Something which misleads or distracts from a relevant or important question. Ryan Johnson's latest film, Knives Out, is basically a masterclass in red herring, so it's not surprising to see similar things being done here. But how can two diametrically opposed tropes like Chekhov's gun and red herrings exist in harmony? Well, it all comes down to the individual story, and what that story is trying to communicate thematically. What is it trying to say? And the question of what is The Last Jedi trying to say seems to be just as divisive as the critical response to the film, so please bear with me as I weigh up a couple of popular interpretations. Direct quotes from the film which could indicate its central theme that often get bandied around are lines like Kylo Ren's "Let the past die, kill it if you have to."
Let the past die. Kill it if you have to.
This makes sense considering that on a metatextual level, this movie seems to be all about killing the past in the way that it violently divorces itself from the familiar storytelling of Star Wars. Like with the undignified slaying of the sequel trilogy's apparent big bad, or the reveal that Rey's parents don't matter, or Yoda seemingly destroying the Jedi texts, or Luke tossing the lightsaber. All of these things happen in a disruptive sequel to a film which was mainly criticised for being derivative of a previous Star Wars movie. The lesson that one should let the past die certainly has real-world applications, sure. Maybe it's encouraging contemporary tentpole blockbusters to try new things and take more risks instead of relying on the past. Or maybe it's even a political statement about being progressive as a society, about moving forward and bucking outdated traditions and paving our own path, somewhat confoundingly delivered in a 40-year-old movie franchise by the film's villain. Others have pointed to Yoda's advice to Luke in the film as its core thesis statement. We are what they grow beyond.
We are what they grow beyond.
This is referring to the new generation of heroes as being the continuing and developing legacy of the Jedi, or the Rebellion. And again, in a real-world sense, this could be read as a practical lesson about moving forward as a society, letting those who are inheriting the Earth define their own rules and values. Yoda is one of those cool boomers, you know, who instead of sharing comics about how much he hates his wife or denying climate change, believes in encouraging the next generation and moving forward for the betterment of humanity. I believe that perhaps combining both of these ideas, letting the past die and accepting we are what they grow beyond, actually creates a perfect narrative and thematic reason to kill off Snoke so relatively early in the trilogy. And means that not only is Snoke a red herring, but his death is also in fact a subtle firing of Chekhov's gun. Sort of. Maybe. Let me explain. I made another video a few years back that examined the slightly distorted parallels between the new Star Wars character lineup and the old. I compared them to Tiny Toon Adventures. It was kinda weird, but go check it out. I think past AJ, or yesterday J, as I like to call him, makes some good points. I made this video before The Last Jedi came out, but I feel that the events of the film actually back up a lot of my theory. Because while the core cast of the sequel trilogy certainly echo a lot of the core cast of the original trilogy in their characterization, personalities, or merely their function in the story, they're all slightly different. They're all developed, given a fresh coat of paint and updated to fit in with modern storytelling techniques and values. Whether that's as simple as creating some diversity by making new Luke a woman, adding a touch of humorous irony by making new Tarkin a baby-faced wimp, or drawing political parallels by making new Vader a temperamental neo-Nazi. More on him later. Snoke, though, the sequel trilogy's clear analogue for Emperor Palpatine, really doesn't offer anything new to the table. He serves the same function, he has the same personality, he's just as ugly, and they even both sit in a big chair. Two of the only characters in all of Star Wars, in all of film, to have sat in a big chair. While Kylo Ren is a fascinating character study on the intergalactic equivalent of an incel, again, more on him later, Snoke is just the same as the Emperor. What we've seen before, but worse. An imitation at best. He's not the next Emperor Palpatine, he's just an Emperor Palpatine cover band. He's boring, he's cliche, and the most interesting thing about him is that he dies. And it took Snoke dying to make me realise how little I actually cared about the character. Snoke being a carbon copy of Palpatine is antithetical to the ideas presented in The Last Jedi, which is why it makes sense narratively to get rid of him. The Last Jedi is all about embracing the new, whether that be indicated by Kylo Ren's let the past die mantra or Yoda's we are what they grow beyond. All the new characters are enhanced versions of old characters except for Snoke, and so is obsolete and needs to die. If Yoda's message can be interpreted as embracing the future and embracing change, but also acknowledging and learning from the past, then this also is a meta-statement about the sequel trilogy as a whole, the familiar combined with the unexpected. Or in Snoke's case, the familiar being unexpectedly killed. Seriously, who gives a shit about this character or his dumb backstory? Whatever his origins are, I'm sure they wouldn't be particularly interesting or layered, and knowing Star Wars, they'd probably be so rife with prequel-era coincidence that just make this massive universe somehow feel so small. Search your feelings, you know it to be true. Also, this scene is so freaking cool. I love it so much. This bit, the fight afterwards, oh my god, this is the true cinema Scorsese was probably talking about. Snoke was a red herring, a decoy character who misleads or distracts us from a much more relevant and much more interesting character. And that much more interesting character Snoke dies to make way for is Kylo Ren, this generation's remix of Darth Vader, with enough of his own distinct qualities to make him not just feel derivative. And this is where I reveal that this whole video about Snoke's death is actually its own red herring, an excuse for me to talk about how Kylo Ren is easily the best part of the sequels, the most interesting idea the franchise has ever tackled, and probably my favourite character in Star Wars as a whole. Honourable mentions to Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan, Baby Yoda, and my boy Porky. Porky? Porkins. Porky boy. Kylo Ren is a great villain because he's an alt-right literal wall puncher named Kyle. Insane. He's a whiny man-child who has problems with authority, and this is an alarming idea for a villain because of how prone he can be to lashing out in the moment. Unlike other villains in today's blockbuster landscape, who at their best are cool and calculated, and at their worst are cartoonish megalomaniacal strawmen. Kylo Ren is scary because he's real. I went to high school with dudes like Kylo Ren. I've reported Facebook comments from dudes like Kylo Ren. Hell, I could have been Kylo Ren. When I was 17, I regularly wore a fedora and complained about girls friend-zoning me. But I've changed. Now I never wear a fedora. My point being, Kylo Ren is a disturbingly realistic villain who echoes the mindset and ideologies of a very real problem in Western society. And if I can try to vaguely work this back into why Snoke's death is great because his character lacks the remix treatment given to the other new cast members, the main thing that differentiates Kylo from Darth Vader is that he's actually an anti-Anakin, a dark character who is tempted to turn back to the light instead of the more storybook typical light character who is tempted to go dark. An internal battle we've seen happen not just with Anakin but with multiple Star Wars characters already to varying degrees. This temptation to turn back to the light almost makes Kylo's potential redemption feel more hopeful and yet somehow more futile because he's an anti-villain, which makes him unpredictable, insecure, unstable, and very interesting. Certainly more interesting than the Emperor 2.0, and I cannot wait to see how Kylo Ren, a villain with such nuanced and unique motivations, carries us forward as the lead villain in The Rise of Skywalker. What is going on here? Okay, so they're bringing the Emperor back. I don't want to be one of those Star Wars fans that writes off a new movie before it even comes out. I'll admit this doesn't bode well for those of us in the do something new and different camp, but there is a way they could maybe spin the Emperor coming back as kind of interesting, as long as they don't backtrack on The Last Jedi's ideas or themes. For example, I would hate to see Kylo Ren seek out Palpatine as a new mentor after all he's been through. But say if Palpatine is a third faction, an antagonist to both Rey and her friends as well as Kylo Ren, then maybe there's hope to continue to watch what happens when the largest army in the galaxy is commanded by the angry white kid from a Year 11 social studies class who used to slam his fists on his desk and whisper to himself when he got mad and grossly misread Fight Club. God, he's a great character. Whether you liked The Last Jedi, hated it for valid reasons, or you think it's the beginning of the white male genocide, we should all be able to agree on one thing. Backtracking is bad storytelling. And a third part of a trilogy which builds something new from the threads left over from the previous film is better than one which apologises and regresses in its thematic ideas and tries to make up for it with nostalgia bait. Snoke's death specifically fuels a lot of hate in people. And really, what defines Star Wars better than an angry nerd being personally offended by someone else's opinion on a movie? And that's why this scene defines Star Wars. Maybe not. Maybe this scene doesn't define Star Wars, but rather it defines where Star Wars could go if given the chance. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy all the others on the Star Wars Defined playlist, which you can find the link to in the description of this video, along with Brown Table's email address if you'd like to make your own video and send it through. If this is your first Cult Popture video, then please consider subscribing and liking us on Facebook and following us at Cult Popture on Twitter and Instagram.